Hello and welcome to our presentation of nutrition and proactive strategies to prevent digestive disease and obesity. My name is Catherine Mulvale and I'm the Executive Director for the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. The Canadian Digestive Health Foundation is here to help you. We are the foundation of the Canadian Association of Gastroenterology and are supported by physicians and scientists who specialize in digestive health and disease. It is our mission to empower people like you to take control of your digestive health with confidence and optimism. The Foundation would like to thank the Public Health Agency of Canada for partnering with us on this event. Without their support, this session would not be possible. We hope to provide each of you with valuable information that you can use in your everyday lives and when speaking with your health partners. Our expert this evening is Dr. Desmond Leddin. Dr. Leddin is a professor of medicine at Dalhousie University and adjunct professor at the University of Limerick, Ireland. He graduated from Trinity College in Dublin and completed his residency at Queen's University and at the University of Toronto. Dr. Leddin chairs the nutrition section of the undergraduate curriculum at Dalhousie. He's director of training for the World Gastroenterology Organization with responsibility for centers in 14 countries. He chairs the Canadian Association of Gastroenterology Guidelines Committee on colon cancer screening, as well as the Committee on Patient Wait Times. Research interests for Dr. Leddin include the humanities, cancer screening, patient access to care, and education transfer to developing countries. Dr. Leddin believes that sharing of information, such as what we will be doing tonight, is essential if we are to reduce the burden of illness and sustain our healthcare system. Now let's get started. I'll turn it over to our expert. Welcome, Dr. Leddin.
Well, thanks very much, Catherine, and welcome everyone who's joined in. Great to see so many people online, and it's a great pleasure to be able to share some of this with you. So just to start, what we want to do in terms of objectives is first of all define what we mean by nutrition, and then we want to look at some of the principles of what makes up good nutrition, and understand the role of nutrition in maintaining health and preventing disease, which is really important, and then hopefully learn some practical steps that you can take to help prevent digestive disease and obesity. And so if we get through that, we'll be doing pretty well, I think. So the first question is about why, obviously, everyone who's logged in tonight does care, but why should we all care about nutrition? Well, you know, digestive diseases, many of them chronic and serious, like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, affect a huge number of people in this country each year. And First Nations people are even more likely to be affected by digestive disorders. Many digestive disorders and many other illnesses are related to poor nutrition. And the obesity problem, of course, as we all know, is a really big problem, with 1 in 4 Canadians now considered obese, and even a larger number who would be overweight. And obesity contributes to poor health outcomes in all kinds of important ways. Nutrition is all about the nutrients in the food and how our bodies use those nutrients and the relationship between diet, health, and disease. And what we're going to do in the next little bit is jump into some of the principles behind it. I hope you won't find it too technical. I don't think you will. But it is important to understand the terminology and the sort of conceptual framework behind discussions on nutrition. So nutrients are substances that the body uses for structure or function, and you've probably heard people talk about macronutrients. And macro means big, so these are nutrients or substances which we need in large amounts, and it primarily refers to the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and we need lots of these. These are sort of the big building blocks of our nutritional intake. Micro meaning small or very small, are substances which are essential to health, but our bodies only need them in very small amounts, and these include, of course, the vitamins and the minerals. Just because they're micro amounts doesn't mean they're not very important. They're just as important as the macronutrients, but we don't need a lot of them. And I guess we don't usually think maybe as water as a nutrient, but it really is important to get enough water in to maintain not just digestive health, but kidney and other forms of health as well. And of course, in the developing world, access to clean supplies of water is a really big problem. This next slide is maybe one of those ones that's a little bit technical, and you can file this or not, but it kind of gives you some of the background. So on the left-hand side of this slide are the groups. CHO is shorthand for carbohydrate. Then there are proteins, and then there are fats. And these are the macronutrients that we referred to earlier on. And then there, in the next column, in the next row, are the minerals and the vitamins. If we go back to the carbohydrates, they can be subdivided into monosaccharides, which are single sugar carbohydrates, or disaccharides, di means two, or polysaccharides, and poly means many. And if we go again to the right-hand side and look at monosaccharides, the main ones are glucose, fructose, and galactose. And you think, gosh, do I really need to know it on this kind of detail that there are monosaccharides and there are 3 types of them? Well, you kind of do, because things like fructose intolerance are increasingly a problem, and probably an important contribution to irritable bowel type symptoms. Similarly, the disaccharides, the 2 sugars, the 3 ones are sucrose, maltose, and lactose, and I'm sure that many of you are on the seminar tonight are lactose intolerant, and if you're not able to digest lactose, you'll get bloating and cramps and diarrhea and tummy upset when you drink milk or milk products. So lactose is really important. Disaccharide, fructose is a really important monosaccharide in terms of causing GI symptoms. And then we have the polysaccharides, and that just means there are lots of individual constituent sugars, and these are broken down into starch and fiber. And deficiencies in fiber intake are a leading cause of GI problems. We'll go over that in a little bit more detail later on, but that's been linked to the development of chronic constipation and diverticular disease, and even to colon cancer and some of those problems. The next group down are the proteins, which we can get from either plant or animals, and they give us these very important amino acids. The advantage of getting proteins from plants like soy is that they tend to be relatively low in saturated fats, and we'll touch on that one again as well. And then we have the fats, which can be either saturated. This saturation refers to the number of chemical bonds that they have, and they can be either completely bonded or have just one saturated or many unsaturated molecules, and they're broken down into their constituent fats. The minerals include iron and zinc and several others, and again, I'm sure that many of you have had problems with absorption of iron and iron deficiency. It's very common, especially in women. And of course, calcium is linked to bone health, and sodium to the development of kidney disease and high blood pressure. The vitamins come in 2 forms, either ones which are soluble in fat, and that's A, D, K, and E. A is linked to night vision, D to bone disease, K is the German word for coagulation, spelled with a K, and E is important for immune function and for brain function. And then the water-soluble vitamins are C and B, riboflavin, niacin, folate, B12, and B12 deficiency. Of these ones, B12 would probably be the most common deficiency that we would see. It's a very common, especially in women who have trouble absorbing it. So that's sort of a very short overview of macro and micronutrients, and we hit on some of the more troublesome ones if you like. So how do nutrients affect us? Well, in health, of course, we need them for energy. We need them to power the engine and get us moving around. And we need them for growth when we're growing. We need them to maintain our bodies when we're in a steady state, and they're important for the prevention of disease. People who are malnourished, who are badly nourished or deficient in macro or micronutrients are more susceptible to illness and to certain forms of cancer and other disorders. In illness, nutrients are really important too, because sometimes nutrients, which are generally good for us, can be bad. So if you eat a diet that's very high in salt, for example, that has been linked to the development of high blood pressure. And the requirements for nutrient may change with illness and may need to be adjusted. So, for example, we see lots of people who have Crohn's disease or colitis, and with those conditions, sometimes adjustment to what would be a normal diet is important. Or people who are intolerant of gluten who will not be able to eat the normal wheats and types of cereals that we would normally do. And, of course, nutrient deficiency may be superimposed on illness. We often see people who become ill with something like ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or one of these neurologic diseases, and they can't eat normally, and that can make the disease much worse. So illness and nutrition interact in all kinds of complicated ways, but maintaining good nutrition and illness is critically important. Now, every country tries to get the message out to the population about how to eat well and how to maintain health. And every country has it. The Americans, one is a pyramid, strangely enough. The British one is a plate, and our one, I guess appropriately, is a rainbow, which is just great. And this slide shows Canada's food guide. And what they're saying is there are 4 basic food groups. Some countries have more than 4, but you can pretty much group them into this. So the green part of the rainbow are vegetables and fruits. And then the yellow are the grains. The blue is milk and alternatives, which includes soy, yogurt, and cheese. And the red is the meat and alternatives. Some countries also put exercise in here, but our one mentions it in the text, but it's not on the front of the book. But we'll come back to exercise a little bit later on. So the message from this slide is that our normal human diet is made up of 4 main groups: vegetables and fruits, the grains, milks and alternatives, and its alternatives. And it's not a static thing. So children's needs for nutrition are different than those of women of childbearing age and of people as they get a little bit older. So for children, it's important to serve small, nutritious snacks, and it's important for all us adults to be good role models for healthy eating. Kids learn from us, and they model in our behavior. For women of childbearing age, one of the most important things is to make sure that you get folic acid in. Folic acid is very important in preventing defects in what's called the neural tube, the brain and spinal cord of developing fetus, and critically important to get that in and prevent that from happening. It's partly done by folate being added to bread, but supplementation is generally recommended as well for anyone who may become pregnant. It's important to remember that not everyone who becomes pregnant intended to become pregnant. So if it's a possibility at all, it's safer to be on it than not on it. And then for men and women over the age of 50, Health Canada recommends that everyone over 50 takes 400 units of vitamin D daily. That message, for some reason, doesn't seem to have gotten out, and the majority of people whom I see are not taking vitamin D, although they're over 50. Vitamin D is a really strange one. It's sort of more of a hormone than a vitamin, and it's really important in terms of immune function and all other kinds of stuff. The evidence for prevention of colon cancer is really pretty good, and most family docs whom I know are taking vitamin D, which has got to tell you something. The other thing to watch out for over 50 And the bad news is actually that this happens over 20, is that your energy requirements drop as you get a little bit older. They start dropping at about 18 or 19, actually. So energy is dropping requirements fast as you get older. You're tending to slow down a little bit, so that's easy to put on weight when that happens. And you've either got to maintain exercise or increase exercise or cut your food intake as you get older if you want to maintain your weight. How much food do we need? Well, we've talked about the 4 groups, the vegetables and fruits, the grains, meat, and milk and alternatives. And then this slide shows the number of food servings per day recommended by Canada's Food Guide. And you can see that it changes from childhood through to older age. So what you should do at this point is go back over this slide again, or grab a pencil and a piece of paper now and find your gender and find your age and write down the number of servings of vegetables and fruit and grain and milk and alternatives and meat and alternatives which you ought to be taking if you believe Canada's Food Guide. And most of us kind of do. I mean, it's really well done, and the science behind it is as good as it gets. So I think it's a little bit tricky, but it's worth doing. So come back to this slide or write it down now. Pick your age, pick your gender, write down the number of food servings which you should eat each day. And the question then is, well, all right, I kind of got that. This slide's a little bit small, so I'm going to go past it because we can cover what's shown in it again in a moment. So if you've got the number of servings that you should have each day based on your gender and on your age, the next question is, well, what the heck is a serving? And so the Food Guide has defined it. So one Food Guide serving of vegetables and fruit is 125 mils, or a half cup of fresh, frozen, or canned vegetable or fruit, or 100% juice, or 1 cup of leafy raw vegetables. And so basically, you look at that, you look at how many you should be taking in, and compare the two of them. Oh, what I do when I'm teaching nutrition is I get our medical students to fill in a little diary for a day before they come to a nutrition lab, and invariably they are not meeting. They're not meeting requirements for vegetables, fruit, grains, and milk products, but they're overdoing it on the meat. So have a look at your own intake and see if it needs to be tweaked a little bit. One food serving of grain products is shown here: a slice of bread, or half a bagel, half a pita, half a tortilla, rice, cereal, and so on. And you can figure out how many what's the recommendation for you, and what you're actually taking, and how close the two are to each other. One Food Guide serving of meat and alternatives is shown here. I won't go through it in detail, but you can see it, and it includes eggs and peanut butter as well, which is a very high source of protein. So you don't have to eat meat all the time. You can eat cooked fish or shellfish or poultry or lean meat. And if you are going to eat meat, try and keep it lean, because you want to keep the fat down to control your caloric intake. As you'll see in a minute, fat has many more calories per gram than anything else. And here's the Food Guide serving of milk and alternatives. Basically a cup of milk, or 3/4 of a cup of yogurt, or 1.5 ounces of cheese would be equivalent to one Food Guide serving. One thing I think it is difficult. It's worth looking at the labels on the foods that you buy in the supermarket. Almost everything, if not everything, has a nutrition label on it, and it's worthwhile trying to learn how to read them. It is a little bit tricky. I mean, it's slightly technical, and sometimes you wonder just how clear it's supposed to be. At least I do, because you almost need to have a calculator, or at least be able to do math in your head to figure out. Because sometimes the calories and so on are given as the package is given as a number of servings, and you have to divide by 4 or 2 or 3 or something in order to work it out. So it's a little bit tricky. But if most of us eat the same foods over and over, and it's worthwhile going through it once or twice and just figuring out what works for you. We should talk about calories because we're going to move on to energy and obesity in a minute, which is basically a calorie imbalance, you know. And the calories are a weird kind of measurement, and it's shown here. Basically what you do is take a food and put it in that little brown chamber over there in an oxygen environment and burn it using electricity. Then you measure the change in the temperature of the water around that burning chamber, and that gives you the number of calories, the amount of heat generated by burning that food. And that's where it comes from. So calorie is really a heat, it's a measure of heat liberated when a food is burnt in oxygen. Kind of weird, really, but that's the measure we've got. And how do we translate that into what we're eating and into exercise? Well, I guess, the first important point is that different foods have different caloric or energy values, and carbohydrate and protein are the same. So every gram of carbohydrate or protein that you eat gives you an energy of about 4 kilocalories, 4 kilocalories per gram. Fat, on the other hand, is much higher. As you can see, it's 9 kilocalories per gram, so it's over twice as dense energy-wise as carbohydrate and protein. And that's why if you're watching your weight or you want to prevent obesity, then you really want to switch to a diet that's lower in fat and higher in protein and perhaps in carbohydrate than fat, because fat is twice as energy dense as protein or carbohydrate. If you eat 200 grams of something which is very fatty, you're going to get a lot more kilocalories than eating something which is low fat. And most of us would prefer to forget that alcohol has calories, but it does. And it's about 7 kilocalories per gram. So it's intermediate between carbohydrate and fat. And 7 kilocalories per gram is actually the same energy as gasoline, which is kind of scary, which is why you can run your car, I suppose, on methanol or one of the synthetic fuels. So alcohol is about the same energy as gas, and 7 kilocalories per gram. So if you are in the habit of drinking a couple of glasses of wine a night, you might want to look at how many calories are in that and do the math, because it may be adding up to something significant. We use the energy for several things, but one of the most important ones is we need it to run the machinery. So if you were lying down in a dark room and you did nothing for 24 hours, you're still going to consume a lot of energy, and it's energy required to keep your heart beating and blood flowing and your brain thinking and your kidneys working and all of that rebuilding and stuff that goes on during the day. All of that requires energy, and it's called the basal metabolic rate, and it accounts for about 2/3 to 3/4 of all of the energy that we need. It's a really important concept, because if your basal metabolic rate speeds up, you'll burn a lot more energy. But if it slows down, you're going to burn less, and you'll accumulate more, and you may become obese. And some of the things which prevent obesity, like exercise, not only burn off energy, but they raise your metabolic rate. So athletes have very high metabolic rates because they've got a lot of muscle, which requires a lot of maintenance energy. Movement also requires energy, and if you have excess energy taken in over and above what you need for basal rate and for exercise, you're going to store it, and you're going to store it in the form of fat. So weight gain happens when you consistently take in more calories than you are burning off. The recommendations for adults are that we should get about 150 minutes of vigorous exercise per week, and ideally that's exercise to the point of where you're breaking a sweat, not just a gentle stroll. And children need a lot more. They need about 60 minutes per day. And we know that people who are physically active live longer, healthier lives, are more productive and less likely to become ill or injured. And there's plenty of information on this, and we've got one reference in there which you can have a look at. But exercise is a very important part of nutrition in the sense that it balances out your energy requirements and your energy expenditure. We're incredibly efficient energy machines. At rest, if you were doing nothing, the average male needs about 1 kilocalorie per kilogram per hour. So let's say that an average male was 80 kilos. That person would burn 80 kilocalories per hour just by doing nothing. Really, that's that basal metabolic rate thing again. And for women, it's a little bit less, significantly less, really, about 10% less. And that's because women have different metabolic rates. They've got different muscle mass, different energy requirements, and need less energy. We are very efficient. Jogging on average burns around 7 kilocalories per kilogram per hour. So let's say you had a 70 kilogram woman went for a run. She would burn 7 times 70 kilos, or 490, about 490 kilocalories. But when you consider that an ordinary cookie is equivalent to about 7 kilocalories, we are very efficient. I mean, one biscuit, and you can run for 10 minutes with and be revenue or energy neutral. It's pretty amazing, really, how good we are at taking energy up and being able to use it. Sorry, just click this slide here. There we are. This is an important concept too, and I'm not sure how many of you would have heard about it. It's called body mass index, or BMI, and it's kind of the unit that we use. If you have somebody who's 80 kilos and is short, it's a very different proposition than you have somebody who's 80 kilos and is very tall. So body mass index relates weight and height. And if you do the calculation for that, and there are all kinds of online calculators, it's very easy to do. Just Google it and you'll find it. You can figure out your own body mass index. And we know from population studies that a body mass index of between about 20 and 25, 26 is associated with the lowest death rate, with the lowest mortality. That if your body mass goes below that, if you're getting very thin, mortality starts to rise because you're malnourished and your immune system is taking a hit. And if your body mass index goes above that, into the overweight and then into the obese range, mortality starts to rise again because all of those other illnesses start to appear, like high blood pressure and kidney disease and diabetes and strokes and heart attacks and stuff. So BMI is really important. So if you don't know what yours is, it'd be worth calculating it later on and just having a look at where you are on the graph. So let's leave that theoretical background behind, if we might, and we'll move on to something a bit more clinical. And we're going to talk about nutrition and digestive health. How does nutrition link to digestive health? Well, there's a tremendous amount of research going on about the relationship between the food that we take in and the bacterial population in the colon or large bowel, which is called the microbiota. And enormous amount of work going on nationally, and we've got some real experts in Canada in this area, and internationally as well, looking at it. And it turns out that there are more bacterial cells in us than there are cells in us, which is kind of weird. I mean, there are more bugs than us in us. It's a little disconcerting, really. And right now we're up to about 10,000 different tribes of bacteria in the colon, in the large bowel. The thing is, the food that you eat determines which bacterial populations will grow. And some of these bacterial populations are very friendly to you and protect you, but some of them are pretty aggressive. And if you eat foods that grow the wrong type of bacteria, those bacteria can talk directly to your immune system, and they can do all kinds of weird things, like change your weight. There's pretty good evidence from rats that they can change your mood, so the type of food that you eat can change the bugs, and the bugs in turn can change how you feel, and they can even change your basal metabolic rate. Amazing, really. So there's an enormous amount of work going on looking at nutrition bacteria, how the bacteria talk to the immune system, and how the immune system affects us. And I think it promises to be a very helpful area in the future. One of the most common conditions affecting people, especially women, it'd be about 9 women to every male whom we'd see with irritable bowel syndrome, is this one, IBS, and it can be really miserable. It presents with constipation and diarrhea or bloating. There's pretty good evidence that fructose intolerance is important, and fructose is the sugar found in fruits and in wheats as well. And lots of people are intolerant to that stuff. Lactose intolerant is also a major issue, and that's the sugar found in dairy products. So if you want to know more about this, just Google or look up in Wikipedia things called FODMAPs. That's FODMAPs, and you will find a ton of information about foods and the relationship to irritable bowel syndrome. You could also look up fructans, and fructans, that's F-R-U-C-T-A-N-S. You'll find a lot of information on that as well. Diverticular disease is very common, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, as is colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, and obesity. So with regard to IBS, 5 million Canadians are suffering with this. It's life-altering, but it's not life-threatening, fortunately. But it can be really miserable. And it varies from being fairly mild to being virtually incapacitating. It presents with this gas, bloating, cramps, mucus, irregular bowel patterns, and it's sometimes linked to its evil cousins of heartburn, nausea, upper abdominal bloating, or even chest pain. The group at McMaster has looked at the relationship between a previous infection, especially after the Walkerton infections and the development of irritable bowel syndrome, and it can also come on after antibiotic use, sometimes with a change in diet or surgery, or a stressful event can precipitate it as well. Diverticular disease, this is a little picture of the bowel here, and you can look at the colon, the left side of it. You can see these pockets, and they're like little bubble wrap that people use to wrap their china when they're sending it in the post or something. Just like that, and food and stuff can become trapped in those pockets. Then it can get inflamed, and it can really hurt. And this condition is very common in Canada, but is essentially unknown in Africa, where people eat a much higher fiber diet. So that comes back to that Canada Food Guide recommendation of making sure that you get enough fiber and cereals in to prevent this from occurring. Colon cancer is a real problem. Canada has a very high incidence of it, and colon cancer is one of the big 3 cancers. In women, the most common cancer is breast, and then lung, and the third one is colon cancer. And in men, it's prostate, lung, and colon cancer. It's the second most common cause of cancer deaths. It's unfortunately not just a really terrible thing to happen to someone, but it's a terrible thing in terms of the healthcare system burden as well, because it's very expensive to treat it. About 22,000 Canadians will be diagnosed with colon cancer this coming year, and almost a third will unfortunately die of it. If it's caught early, it's very treatable. And of course, it can also, to some extent, be prevented by diet. We talked a little bit about fiber, and there's some evidence for that, but there's really pretty good evidence that vitamin D is important in the causation of colon cancer. And I think following that Canada guide on starting vitamin D if you're over 50 is a pretty good idea. So a diet high in fat appears to increase the risk. High fiber vegetables and fruits may lower it. Vitamin E may be certain, probably vitamin D, or use of aspirin may also lower the risk. Smoking and obesity increase it. Obesity seems to increase the risk of most cancers, actually. Physical activity decreases the risk, and these non-steroidal drugs may decrease it too. But you've got to be careful with aspirin and its friends. They're not without complications and side effects, and So don't start on one of those without asking a pharmacist or your family doc about it. Another illness that we should talk about is inflammatory bowel disease, and there are two separate illnesses really, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. These affect about 250,000 Canadians, and Canada has one of the highest rates of this in the world, and Nova Scotia has the highest rate in Canada. So as far as we know, Nova Scotia is ground zero for Crohn's disease. We have the highest incidence of this disease in the known universe, unfortunately, and we see a great deal of it. I mean, it's so common that in this country that we would see new cases most days, whereas in some parts of the world, they've never seen it, and they keep asking us to tell them a bit about it, but it's unknown. And it was unknown before 1932, and Crohn first described that illness in the late 30s. It's now become pretty clear that the gut bugs, the bacteria in the gut, are an important part of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. There is an important genetic part to it as well. The genes are being mapped, and there's about 54 genes involved now. And there's an environmental trigger as well, which we don't completely understand. So let's move on to obesity. Then we'll wrap it up and take some questions. So the definition of obesity is defined as someone with a BMI over 30. And you know what a BMI is now. That's the graph we looked at earlier on that relates your height and your weight. And the government, CIHI, I think, is responsible, does the community surveys of health regularly. They published their data recently, actually, and you can find it online if you look. And the latest data is about 1 in 4 Canadians are obese, and another significant percentage are overweight. Being obese doesn't mean that you're well-nourished. Obese people can be severely malnourished and can be certainly micronutrient deficiency. And the reason that there's an ATM there is that obesity is a bit like your bank account, right? If you consistently put more in terms of energy and calories in our case rather than dollars, than you take out, it'll accumulate. It'll build up. We're pretty efficient storage machines. And if you're running a surplus all the time in terms of your balance between calories in and calories spent, then you will accumulate calories and you will become obese. In terms of how to prevent it, well, one important thing is back to the macronutrients, and most recommendations are that no more than 20% to one-third of our caloric intake should consist of fat. So one important part of preventing obesity is to limit the amount of fat that you're taking in. And the obvious thing there is to look at the junk food, and also look at meats, and whether you make sure that you eat lean meat as opposed to fatty meat, and keep the calories down that way. We need about 1 gram per kilogram of protein per day, and the rest of it is carbohydrate. But the most important thing is stick to low fats when you can, to limit the amount of calories that you're taking in. And then the other issue is you need to know your requirements. Your caloric requirement changes with age. It's fairly easy to calculate, actually, and you can find that online quite easily. Control your caloric intake with fats and with alcohol. Read the labels and watch that portion size. The portion sizes have been growing over the years, and you're probably aware of the controversy in New York as they're trying to ban these huge servings of pop, which are very calorie dense. And then control your calories and watch the exercise. Exercise burns calories. It adds muscle, which requires a lot of calories just for maintenance. And importantly, it steps up your basal metabolic rate. It makes your engine turn over faster, and you burn more calories even when you're doing nothing, which sounds pretty good, really. In terms of achieving a healthy weight, well, the first question is, where are you now? The next thing is, where do you want to get to? Get a scale and weigh yourself every morning, even though, it's pretty funny. In the clinic, we weigh everyone who comes into the clinic. Everyone invariably says, oh, do I have to get up on that scale? No one wants to do it. But once you start looking at it and and once you start looking at it and you start monitoring it, it can be controlled. Is there room for improvement in your exercise regime? Well, some of it, we're all very busy, and the thing to do is to just schedule in exercise as part of your daily life. If it's important enough to go to a meeting, and it's important enough to take 15 or 30 minutes to walk home instead of taking the car or the bus. And do reward yourself occasionally, because if you're going through this regime, you should give yourself positive reinforcement. In terms of recommendations for a healthy diet, Health Canada's recommendations are here. I think these are really good ones, actually. This is the top 12 from Health Canada. And you could do a lot worse than print off this slide and stick it on your fridge. So eat at least one dark green and one orange vegetable per day. That seems pretty straightforward. Prepare vegetables and fruit with little or no added fat, sugar, or salt. Eat vegetables and fruits more often than juice. Make at least half of your grain products whole grain each day. The evidence for this is very good. There's a recent publication from England showing that eating whole grains as opposed to just plain white breads can reduce the risk of colon cancer by a third. Amazing, really. I mean, we don't have drugs that are as powerful as that. Choose foods that are lower in fat, sugar, or salt. Drink skim, 1% or 2% milk each day, and select lower fat milk alternatives. Have meat alternatives such as beans, lentils, and tofu often, even if the kids are kind of object to it, they'll get used to it, and it actually tastes really good anyway. Eat at least 2 servings of fish each week. Select lean meat and alternatives prepared with little or no added fat or salt. Enjoy a variety of foods. No one can figure out why the French are so healthy, but one of their characteristics is that they eat a much greater variety of foods than we do. And then the other one is satisfy your thirst with water rather than sugary drinks. So in terms of summing it up, I want to bring this to a close because we want to address some of your questions, I hope. We've defined nutrition. I think you're as good as Med 1 on that one. I hope you now understand the role of nutrition in maintaining digestive health and preventing digestive disease and obesity. We know how nutrition and obesity impact digestive health and disease, and you've seen some examples of that: diverticular disease and colon cancer and inflammatory bowel disease. And I hope you've learned some practical steps you can take to prevent digestive disease and obesity. So with that, I think I hand it back to you, Catherine, and we'll hopefully address some questions and maybe get some answers.
Absolutely. That was wonderful, Dr. Leddin. Thank you very much. Several times we've referred to Canada's Health Guide, and the audience won't be able to print off the slides for about 2 weeks. We'll actually have the whole presentation up on our website within a couple of weeks. But if you're looking to get a copy of Canada's Food Guide, you can actually go and get a PDF of it from their website, which is www.hc-sc.gc.ca. So that it's the acronym really for www.healthcanada-santécanadienne.governmentofcanada.ca.
Well, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think it's a great guide. I mean, I use it over in Europe, and it's very clear. It's very well written. I mean, with everything in nutrition, people will argue about whether that's the right recommendation or the wrong recommendation because it's very complex. But this guide is very good. The other thing that's lovely about it is that it recognizes that we're a multicultural society, and it has recommendations based on different ethnic groups as well. My favorite was the recommendation about the number of ptarmigan eggs, I think it was, to eat if you're living in the Arctic, which is not an experience I've had yet.
Okay, that's great. So one of the questions that we have here is, I have a bloated feeling every time after I eat almost anything. What can I do to prevent that?
Yeah, I mean, bloating is one of the most common symptoms that we would see. There are potentially a lot of different causes for it, and you definitely talk to your family doc, and who may want to send you along to see a GI doc. But let's assume that there's nothing really bad going on, because, I mean, there can be really bad things. It can mean bowel obstructions and tumors and things, but it generally doesn't. Let's assume that it's food related. The commonest reasons that we would see would be either intolerance of the dairy products, particularly lactose, or intolerance of the fructans, these fructose sugars. The dairy product one, if you're intolerant of lactose, we have an enzyme on the lining of the intestine which normally digests it. And if you don't have enough of the enzyme and you're taking in milk or cheese or ice cream or chocolate, your body can't digest it. It moves down through the small intestine instead of being digested. And when it reaches the colon, the large bowel, which is full of bacteria, the bugs think that, Christmas has arrived, and they digest this thing and produce gas and bloating and discomfort, sometimes with diarrhea. So a trial of coming off lactose would be a good idea, of milk products and its cousins. If that doesn't work, it's worth having a look at the fructans that we talked about earlier on. And they've become sort of the new lactose. Sometimes people are encouraged to eat very healthy diets because they were full of fruits and vegetables, but you can overdo it a bit. And if you do, it'll produce this bloating as well. The food group that's most linked to it are these FODMAPs. That's FODMAPs. And for any of you who has this, just Google it and you'll find a lot of stuff on FODMAPs. That seems to be pretty legitimate, and the American Dietetic Association has come out with some recommendations around that recently.
Okay, great. At the Foundation, we actually get a lot of questions about people who have had their gallbladders removed. So a couple of questions have come through, and one of them is there a relationship between having your gallbladder removed and stomach acid or lower intestinal disorders?
Yep, it's a good question, and there is, for sure. The gallbladder is normally a storage. So the liver produces bile all the time, and we store it in this little gallbladder, which is about the size of, I don't know, when it's full anyway, about the size of a small apple, I guess. And then when you eat, that gallbladder contracts and it empties the bile into the intestine. And the bile is really important for digestion of foods and for absorption of them. So if you take the gallbladder out, you don't have that chain anymore, and you don't have that storage, and the bile just sort of continually goes into the intestine. Most people, probably more than 90% who have their gallbladders out, don't have anything at all. But some people, the bile refluxes back into the stomach. It's not really acid so much, it feels like it though. You get this stomach irritation and nausea type feeling, particularly after eating. And that may be bile refluxing back into the stomach. And there's some medication that's effective for that. At the other end of the gut, because you have this constant trickle, the bile can go down into the lower bowel and produce a sort of chronic watery diarrhea with irritable bowel type symptoms. And that one responds very, very well to a medication called cholestyramine, which binds the bile salts and just cuts that off. So, yeah, the answer is yes. The majority of people don't have any trouble. Some people have a lot of trouble at one or other end, but it's usually pretty treatable.
Okay, great. Another question is, I have diverticulitis and take Peg-Lite when constipated. Is there something else I can take or something that I can do that may help?
Yeah, so let's go back to the diverticular story again for a second. So the diverticulum, if any of you go to Pompeii, and I hope you do, and go into a Roman house, the diverticulum was the little closet off the hallway where they hung their cloaks when they came home from work. So it means an opening off the main opening. So these diverticuli in the colon are little pockets in the bowel where the bowel has bulged out, usually from chronic constipation. Many people who have diverticular pockets do not have the inflammation. And in medical speak, when we add itis to the end of anything, it means inflammation. So tonsillitis means inflammation of your tonsils, and appendicitis means inflammation of your appendix, And diverticulitis means inflammation of the diverticuli. If diverticulitis is not the same thing as having diverticular disease, and most people who have diverticular disease never get diverticulitis, if you get recurrent episodes of diverticulitis with pain and fever and going to emergency and stuff, really more than one or two of them is an indication for surgery on that section of the bowel. If you just have diverticular disease, what you want to do is increase the amount of fiber in your diet if you can. Some people aren't able to tolerate it, but if you can increase it, and particularly increase the amount of water so that you're increasing the size of that tube, the pressure in the pockets drops and the pain tends to get better. The problem is with fiber, if you take it, a lot of people can get bloating and cramps and discomfort. But one, and I'm not selling any products, that is worth trying is psyllium, and you can get that either at the health food store or in the form of Metamucil, and we use that a lot. The advantage of psyllium is that the fiber is not digestible by bacteria, so it tends not to cause this bloating and discomfort. So, yep, make sure your water is okay, intake is okay, get lots in. Make sure you're getting some exercise. Make sure you're getting some fiber, either in the form of vegetables and fruits or psyllium, and add that into. And in terms of laxatives, the one that we and the pediatricians would prefer would be these polyethylene glycol ones. They seem to be the least toxic.
Okay. Do you have a recommendation for how much fiber people should be trying to get in their diet every day?
Well, Catherine, I'd make the same recommendations as the Canada Food Guide. I mean, we all need to individualize our intake to our age and our gender. So I would send people back to that food guide and have a look at it. Look at your age, look at your gender, look at where you are, look at the fruits and vegetables intake and cereal intake, and crank it up that way. And don't forget the water. We tend not to drink very much, and the bowel really needs water with fiber to get bulk for bowel health.
Okay, great. So we've just got about 3 minutes left, so we'll try to squeeze in a couple of more questions.
Sure.
We have several people on the line, I believe, that are suffering from IBD, either from Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. So we have 3 different questions. I'm going to try and put them all together because I think you can answer them together.
Okay.
So it says, I've recently been diagnosed with IBD and my doctor says to eat anything, but is there certain foods that I should be avoiding or is it trial and error? That's one question. Another one that's related says that I've been told that Crohn's can be managed by diet. Is that really true? And the third part there is, apart from medications and regular exercise, is there anything that I can do to keep a Crohn's patient in remission?
Right. Well, thanks. Those are all great questions, and I wish we had more time to address them. There's no question but that diet is very important in the causation of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. In developing world countries, Crohn's disease is unknown. So straight south of Halifax is Bolivia, and in Bolivia they've never seen Crohn's disease. But in the adjacent country, Brazil, as they start to get a little bit wealthier and eat a diet that resembles more Canada's diet, they start to see Crohn's. So diet's really important in causing it. The frustration, Catherine, for all of us is that once the darn thing develops, no one's really found a diet that's able to put it consistently into remission. So we follow nearly 2,000 people in the clinic. When we line them up and ask them, is there anything that bothers you? Most people, I'd say maybe 1,000 of the 2,000 would say yeah, and they'd identify something. The weird thing is it's never the same food, and that's what leads to the frustration and the confusion about it. I would say try, experiment, but it is so difficult because the disease has its own agenda and is varying anyway, so it's hard to link it to a specific food. But I have certainly seen people follow specific diets, particularly the low-carbohydrate diet, and they feel that it's been successful for them. I mean, I wish I could give more specific advice than that. The one thing I can offer is hope. There's a tremendous amount of work going on around diets and inflammatory bowel disease, and there's every prospect in the future that we will be prescribing specific diets customized and tailored for particular conditions like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis.
And wonderful. It's always nice to know that there's hope. And just for the individual who's been newly diagnosed, I would just remind you that CDHF has a series of web seminars, much like the one that we're doing tonight, and there's one specifically on IBD. So you might want to go into the resource section and look under web seminars, and you'll get a session very much like this that is specifically focused on inflammatory bowel disease. So let's move on to the last question before we wrap up. And this is from an individual who suffers from GERD. They said that they've been told that they will have GERD for the rest of their life and that they will have to be taking proton pump inhibitors forever. So they're wondering, is there anything that they can do to help prevent episodes of heartburn? And is there any recipes or food guides that you could suggest that might help them out?
Yeah, I mean, there are fairly specific recommendations around GERD. I mean, most of the people whom I see with GERD tend to have the bad end of it. So I think these recommendations probably work better for people who have milder disease. And what's generally recommended is eat a diet that's higher in protein and carbohydrate and avoid the fats. The problem is fats paralyze your stomach. So if you eat a fatty meal at dinner or a fatty snack late at night, that food's going to sit there for hours and it has more opportunity to reflux up and cause GERD stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. So that has more opportunity to reflux up and burn the lining of the stomach. So a low-fat, relatively high protein diet is what's recommended. The PPIs are difficult to get off once you're on them, and the thing to do is try halving the dose or try going to every second day and see if you get away with that. But be careful, if you've had actual ulcers in the esophagus, GERD, it is really difficult, especially if a hernia has developed, to get off the medication and control your symptoms. And you don't want to get into trouble with ulcers and scarring and all of that horribleness.
Okay. So that's all the time that we have for this evening. So on behalf of the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Leddin, for sharing your insights and your expertise.
Well, my pleasure, Catherine. Thanks very much for asking me, and I hope it's been of some use to everyone.
Indeed. And also, we'd like to thank the Public Health Agency of Canada for partnering with us. And, of course, we want to extend our very special thanks to you who have been on the line, who've joined us. We hope that the session has empowered you to better understand nutrition and how it can help you prevent digestive disease and obesity. And just as we sign off, you'll see a link to a short survey. And we ask that you just please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about our web seminar tonight and provide us with ideas for sessions you'd like to see presented in the future. We're really here for you, and we want to make sure that we're delivering information that is useful and needed by you. So thank you again very much, and this concludes our session.
Thanks a lot. Take care, Catherine. Bye, everyone.